Well, let's get controversial. Because, goddamn, this was a shit show if you ask me. Hello, my name is Daniel Mart. I am an actor and filmmaker based out of South Florida, and this week I'm going to give basically my final thoughts on the whole SAG-AFTRA strike. Last week on December 5th, the SAG-AFTRA contract was officially ratified, and I'm not going to say like most people, because I don't really know what the vibe is right now on it, but like a lot of people, I'll say that, like a lot of people, I'm not too happy with how the SAG-AFTRA strike turned out, how we were basically screwed over. And the main issue I'm talking about here has to do with AI, and that by far, above anything else, whether it be this strike or the WGA strike, for example, or I think that's the biggest number one issue on the table by far. And I'm going to just come out and say it, they fucked us over. They completely fucked us over when it came to that whole the AI stuff. So what am I talking about? So when the picket fences were down, when they said, okay, we have a tentative contract right now, we're going to look over it, etc., etc., etc. One of the main things that came out is the fact that the companies, ANTPT, was still allowed to scan us and use us for their projects. Now, the only change was that they could only use us for that, the scan, they could only use it for that one project. But let's be honest, would they only use it for that one project? You know? And it's one of those things that when we found that out, we were like, why is that still being allowed? That's one of the reasons we have been on the picket lines for day in, day out. So that AI is not on the contract, on the table at all. We do not want AI at all. And look, in all fairness, I think AI would have been on the contract regardless. But the way it's on the contract, it's too big of an issue to ignore, even now that's ratified. And the way I think it just turned out, I'm going to be honest, I find it really disgusting. Like, I find it extremely disgusting. I find it extremely, honestly, it's a betrayal. I'm going to put it straight up. It is a betrayal on the union's part. And it doesn't help that even before this, people were already mad at Fran Drescher, Duncan Crabtree, for their basic avoidance in questions. I discussed that in my previous SAG-AFTRA video. And they had several Instagram live broadcast videos, whatever you want to call them. And every time an issue on these topics came up, time in, time out, day after day, whatever, they continuously either avoided the question or gave a lot of non-answers, or just a lot of answers that didn't make sense. Like, they didn't know what the hell they were talking about because they don't care about us at the end of the day, let's be honest. Yeah, and I kind of just want to go over some of the posts that SAG-AFTRA has put out because I find them very odd. I'm just going to leave it at that. I find it very odd in the way that they're celebrating it. And here's the thing, at the end of the day, with everything else they fought for, with the streaming rights, for example, everything else they fought for, the rights for, actor breaks and all that stuff, for casting and etc. I think some of that other stuff that they fought for was great, and I think those wins should be celebrated. But it gets overshadowed by the AI, because AI by far was the one thing we were all worried about regardless. It was that and streaming revenue, but even then I would still say AI. I'm going to start off with this first post that they put, and basically here they say, today we close out one of the most important chapters in recent entertainment industry history. The 2023 TV theatrical contract has officially been ratified by SAG-AFTRA members by a vote of 78.33 to 21.67 with a turnout of 38.15. I look at that and I'm like, less than half the union voted. That is not good. In my opinion, that is not good. Granted, it came down at the end basically between 80% and 20%. So 80% of the people who did vote wanted this. But even then, something about it just feels dirty, if I'm being honest. Even if I look at WGA, where they also had a turnout of less than half. To be more specific, they had 8,525 people who voted, and of those, 8,435 voted yes, and 90 people voted no. So that was a 99 to 1% turnout, and they have roughly around 20,000 members. And the amount of people who voted was roughly 42%. they also had less than a 50% turnout, but theirs was just basically, again, they had a 99 to 1% turnout, whereas here we have an 80 to 20% turnout, or challenge or whatever. And I feel like that 99 to 1% is such more clear cuts than 80 to 20%. And I think part of it that also I feel dirty about the 80 to 20% is the fact that there's a lot of controversy even in that statistic, or I guess just the way the votes went, because I haven't heard anything about WGA. Now, granted, I'm not going to sit here and say, oh, I follow the WGA, but right now, when I was researching between comparing the SAG-AFTRA strike to the WGA strike, I just found the WGA strike to be such a more cleaner, much more easier vote, a much more agreeable vote. Like, everybody clearly was happy. Yes, you did have your dissenters at 1%, but again, that's 1%, not 20%. 20% at the end of the day is still a very sizable chunk of people who voted, who are against the whole ratification of it. And again, it comes down to those AI stuff for a large majority of us. And I think the other part of it that also I feel dirty about it is that initially a lot of people didn't want to vote because SAG-AFTRA didn't release the contract. They released a 20-page summary, or 18 to 20-page summary of the contract, and everybody was like, hey, we want to see the contract. We don't care that's 100 plus pages. We want to see the contract. And they didn't really release it till the final hours, like a few days before the voting actually was set to close. And then I think the other part that bothers me is that it's on top of the fact, and granted, I don't know how much of an effect this would have had, but the fact that they were doing this in general feels just really dirty after everything we went through. But I think the other part that kind of gets me and pisses me off is the fact that there's a lot of people on this post, for example, who are saying, hey, I wasn't allowed to vote because my dues were overdue, my payments were overdue, and I couldn't pay because I've been on strike for you guys for the past 3-4 months. What the fuck? And it's not one person. There's several upon several people who are saying that I was not allowed to vote because I was not allowed to pay my dues because I've been on strike. And that's unfair. And honestly, I don't know how much of an effect that would have had. I'm not sure if that would have made it to its 75 to 15 or it would have been 60 to 30. I'm not sure what kind of effect that would have had. But I still think the fact that they did that regardless after the strike is utterly disgusting. It is utterly disgusting, the fact that they essentially booted people out of the union because they couldn't pay their dues because we were on strike. And that's on top of the fact that we've been on COVID watch for the past 3 years, even before this. And I just think it's very inappropriate and dirty, and they should have extended the dues or give an extension to the dues up until like early next year, like January, February of next year, to let people catch up on payments. Because look, regardless if this would have had a big effect on the statistics or not, just the fact that they did that in general is just, what the fuck? Now, I did want to kind of point out this statement they made as well. With the ratification of the agreement, SAG-AFTRA members will receive unprecedented wage escalations. That is true. Significant improved streaming compensations. True. And the first ever crucial protection around the use of artificial intelligence technology, AI. And again, that statement doesn't really hold true, because it's basically the same shit that AMTP them basically said, hey, we're going to do anyways. And that's what I mean by it's a betrayal, because they're still going to scan you, and they still have the ability to reject you or recast you if you refuse to do the AI scan. And that's the point. We don't want the AI scan in the first place. And there's a lot of people saying, hey, this is baby steps. We agreed to this deal, and we could maybe fight for better AI rights in the future. And I don't, maybe this is just a pessimist in me, but I don't really think it works like that. I think once you give them a nibble, they're going to try to take the whole thing. And this is a pretty big nibble, because right off the bat, we're already allowing them to scan us. And the fact that they're going to scan us in the first place, it's already going to start affecting jobs right off the bat. It's going to start off with the background extras, because that's where it was going to start regardless. But it's very slowly going to creep into some of these other roles that we need and we want to survive in this industry. I see it turning out very bad for us, and the fact that we agreed to this in a sense, it's just very, very disappointing. So yeah, that's basically all I want to say. I just want to give my last final thoughts on the whole SAG-AFTRA strike and how disappointed I am on how it turned out at the end, because at the end of the day, our voices weren't actually heard, in my opinion, because there's still, and it's one of those things, I completely agree, it could literally just be the vocal minority. But I think this is one of those times where the vocal minority has a point. Usually the vocal minority, when I see it in a discussion, it's usually a bunch of people who are uninformed. It's usually a bunch of people who don't know what they're talking about, who are, in a lot of ways, bullying the silent majority. But I think this is one of those times where the vocal minority actually has a point and actually has something legitimate to say. Whether the silent majority agrees or not, that's a whole different situation. But I think this is one of those situations where the vocal minority actually has a point. I don't think this is the biggest win as many people want to make it out to believe. I think at the end of the day, it's still going to screw us over. If anything, it's going to cause more problems for us in the future. And just in general, how the voting turned out or went, with the fact that they didn't want to release the contract to the final hour, that Fran Drescher and Duncan Crabtree were avoiding questions, avoiding to answer questions properly, and giving vague statements during their Instagram live broadcast feeds or whatever that's called. I know that didn't sit well with anybody, with a lot of people. The fact that they were basically shunning actors, members of the union, from voting, not allowing them to vote because they couldn't pay their dues, because they were on strike for their rights, I think is very dirty. There's a lot of stuff from this that just makes me very uncomfortable, very dirty, and I just didn't like how it turned out at the end. We'll see how it goes. I just wanted to give my final thoughts on this because I've been following this for so long. I've already made several videos upon this already. Just want to give my final thoughts on it. And yeah, what are your thoughts on the whole SAG-AFTRA strike and how it went down at the end? Comment all that down below, let me know. And that's basically it for now. This is Daniel Mart signing off.